right? Um, so today we discussed these mergers, and I think it will be one of the most, well, popular cases if you ever practice in this area of competition law, because in most cases, well, for example, in a law firm, they would separate between few different practices under the umbrella of competition. One practice is usually, solely dedicated to mergers. Sometimes it's called merger control. Some of the bigger firms, for example, Baker and McKinsey, they do have the antitrust team, right? And they actually have more than one team of antitrust. And in one of these teams is a team that's dedicated purely for merger control, right? And there will be a team of the compliance, and then team of litigation, who will be working on this abuse of dominance and different conducts. Whereas the one team is usually dedicated to merger control, and that says a lot about the magnitude of the topic itself, right? So just to recap, we understand that there are essentially two kinds. Even though the topic say the horizontal, but the same principle actually applied. I'm sorry, the same principle applied for the case of vertical as well, and also conglomerate, which could be done across different industries, right? Conglomerate, and I mean, you look at the industries nowadays, right? The global economy, and you see that it is really difficult to say that one industry is completely independent from another. For example, when Google bought Waze, which is a map app, right? The map company, the digital map company. Uh, it seems it seems to be. I mean, they're pretty much quite, well, not that related to each other, but eventually some of the technologies in one firm could be applied and developed further to be used in another industry. What is even more important is nowadays when you get these data of consumers in one industry, you can use this data, you can reuse them in so many different contexts, right? And that is essentially why, especially for example, in European Union, they just introduced this Digital Market Act, which is the law that try to expand the scope of competition law in order to cover these, what they call the gatekeepers, right? The firms that have lots and lots of data, users' data in particular, um, because they realize that having these data, you can essentially use these data in so many different applications. And when you move, for example, when you merge with another firm, when you acquire another smaller company, it is not just about human resources, not just about technology, but also about data. And when you use it, you can reutilize this data and get a business that benefits. I mean, across different industries, right? So now the dimension of merger and acquisitions, especially when it comes to this competition effect, is quite far-reaching, and the scope has been enlarged significantly in the past. I think you can say the past decade. All right. So that just would like to put you in the context. Any question here so far?
Um,
Yeah.
the Digital Market Act, I mean, can you go a little bit more in detail about like how does it regulate the gatekeeper?
Right. Well, they try to put some sort of duties on these gatekeepers, but to be qualified as gatekeepers, you have to be um, substantially large. For example, you have to provide services to more than 10% of the European population, right? So that essentially, like, I think it's how many? Let me have a look. But 10% of the European population, that is quite a big amount, right? Let me find the exact number for you. Could not remember the figure, but how large is it? Give me a second. All right, so here it is. Yes. You have to operate a core service platform with more than 45 million monthly active users located or established in the EU, right? And for the business users, you have to provide services to more than 10,000 annually active business users established in the EU. And in terms of income, you need to have an annual turnover in the European Economic Area equal to or above 6.5 billion euro in the last 3 financial years. And that is quite substantial. It is substantial because if you think about it, there are not that many firms who will be considered gatekeepers. Just a few of them, right? But some of the duties that were imposed on these gatekeepers are, for example, you might need to share your user data with smaller companies. You might need to transfer some technical knowledge with smaller companies. So the whole purpose is that they believe that by having that amount of data, you are on quite a substantial advantage over your competitors, especially smaller firms. And you can think of these gatekeepers such as like Facebook, right, or Google, Amazon. Well, these platforms are huge, and I think we discussed this earlier, that when you are this large, especially when we discuss this abuse of dominance, right? When you are running these platforms, they tend to tipping, right? They tend to be tipping in the sense that when you gain certain traction, you gain more and more users, then more and more users will keep coming into your platform, and you will be huge. While your competitors, especially the latecomers, find it really difficult for them to get the same amount of users in order to compete with you. And one of the reasons that they can't compete with you is because when you have more and more users data, you are more sort of able to provide better services, right? Because you have more data, you can customize your service, you learn more about your users, and your product becomes better, right? You think about this personalization of Facebook ads. It become more and more accurate, right? It provides better not better service, but in the sense that it it has hit the target more often than not, especially and that is, I mean, the credit goes essentially to the amount of data that they acquired, and that allows them to improve technology to make a better prediction as well. So the Digital Market Act tried to reduce the discrepancy between competitors, and one of the mechanisms is through the data sharing. But also there are other standards as well. Like you should make your technology or your data interoperable, in the sense that whenever the users want to move from one platform to another, it has to be smooth and easy, right? And one of the criteria is you should make your data available across different sort of systems. So, for example, you want to move from Facebook to another platform that that was just invented, then that should be quite easy for you and also your friends, right? So that's gonna make it easier for people to migrate across different platforms, right? So that's essentially the Digital Market Act. If you want to read further, there are so many articles written by the European Commission themselves, and yeah, I mean the documents are really interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Right, thank you. Okay, um, so these are different dimensions of merger, right? You have horizontal, which basically means it could be a merger between manufacturer and other manufacturer, or it could be a merger between distributor and distributor, right? So at the same level, but also it could be mergers across different, well, across different levels, supply chain as well. For example, a manufacturer um, purchases a business from another owner of the distributor, right? That's possible as well, and that will be considered vertical. And if you may recall, we discussed this vertical restraint and the horizontal restraints already. We sort of get a sense that the severity, especially in terms of a competition compromise, would be more on the horizontal, right? Because it is more likely that when you, in the case of restraint of conduct, it is possible that if you horizontally say collude, well, that could essentially eliminate competition altogether. Well, merger is quite similar. That it is more severe when you consider about horizontal merger rather than when you consider the vertical restraint, right? Okay. When you merge, we can explore what it means by merger later, but let's talk about now the conceptually. I think you understand when it is merger and acquisition. It means that, well, could be two firms become one, right? Or could be one firm buys another firm. Roughly, that is what it means. But there are two main effects here that merger could cause in terms of competition. The first kind is what we call unilateral effect, and the second kind is what we call pro-collusive effect. The difference between these two kinds of effect is when it is a unilateral effect, it means that, okay, for example, you have a lot of firms in the same market, right? This is the market, and when you merge, for example, these three business operators decided they will merge into the same firms. What happened is that post-merger, you're gonna have just three business entities, right? You have two less entities, and you have one entities in place, and usually this one will be much more powerful, right? So the unilateral effect means that this new player, this dark player, is more capable of exercising its unilateral effect. Not unilateral effect, but its unilateral power. Right? It is because now you have less player, and when you merge, you become bigger. And when you're bigger, you can exercise this sort of different market power. You can increase the price. You have more room for um, the price increase. You have more room for quantity restraint, right? You may cover larger areas in terms of geographical areas. So in that case, this is a unilateral effect. When a player becomes larger and more powerful, that is the first effect. But another effect is what we call collusive effect. What it means? You want to guess what it means when you talk about collusive effect? Yeah, which should be please.
Does it mean it's easier for a business entity in the market to collusive with another?
Yes, yes, yes. Essentially, yes. Right, because you have less players, and we learned about collusion already. We know that the fewer player you have in the market, the easier that you can arrive at certain agreement, right? So when you have less player, then it is easier to collude. So there are two main effects when it comes to the merger. Well, let's start with the unilateral first, right? So now just I think we could intuitively understand merger and acquisition, right? Without actually without going into detail what exactly means by it, but we could come back to that later. But for now, you think about this, right? It could be that when you merge and you become the new firm, or it could be that you basically eat another firm and this firm disappears, right? So essentially that's the meaning of merger and acquisitions. And in the eye of this competition law, we essentially we consider them equivalent, right? Because one way or another you just have less competitive force. But I know that in some other, especially corporate law, you consider them differently. But in this case of competition, what it means is that you have less players, and when you have less players, you have less competitive force, right? Okay, let's consider the first effect, which is the unilateral effect. Again, this is the case of merger, and as we discussed earlier, there are two kinds of regimes under the umbrella of competition law, right? The first one is illegal per se, the second one is rule of reason. And we learned that the only one case that is illegal per se is collusion, it's the cartel, right? The hardcore one in Article 54. Right, but it's in most other cases, it's going to be rule of reason. And when it comes to rule of reason, when you consider unilateral effect, you have to consider this trade-off between efficiency and market power. Because whenever there is a merger, well, large or small, the effect on market power would follow. Right, it could be a tiny effect, but or it could be substantial. We don't know. It depends on the case-by-case basis. But essentially, you know that the market power would increase, right, for especially a merged entity, right? And in that case, your burden of proof, especially if we would explore later that if the market power will increase substantially, then the burden of proof is on your side as the merging parties to prove that, okay, I know that even if market power would increase, but efficiency would increase as well and outweighs the market power increase. Right? So well, this is when this is sort of heavier, then it will become a bit imbalance here. And your role is to say that, well, efficiency will increase as well and even more. And as long as you can prove that the size is larger, the change of the size is larger, and that would compensate increase in market power, you are in a good position, right? And well, in an absence of efficiencies, what would happen is, well, basically, as I said, if you cannot prove an increase in efficiency, what would follow is definitely that market power will increase, right? And another thing is, well, your rivals would benefit from that as well. In the sense that this is not just you, right? This is not just about you as the emerging party, but also your rivals, or basically you can call them outsiders when it comes to this merging transaction. Then there are free riders. In the case that, well, when you can increase the price because you have more market power, then your competitors could increase their prices as well. And that is why we call them as free riders. Right? Free riders means that you don't have to do anything, but you get a benefit of some incidents. And in this case, that incidents mean that, for example, you have two firms. For example, you have three firms in the market, and they are competing, right? They're competing against each other. What happened is that, well, that competition level might be quite substantial. But suppose that there's a merger between these two firms. And when there's a merger between these two firms, this become a big firm who has a significant market power to the level that it could increase the price, not fully arbitrarily, but quite well. There's a room for a price adjustment, and suppose that these big firms increase the price. What happened is that this guy, who has nothing to do with the transaction, right? But could act as a free rider in the case that, okay, I can increase the price as well because my competitors are now becoming just a competitor, and that competitor increases the price, so I can increase my price as well and get a benefit in this, right? And that is in the case of an absence of efficiency. And when this happens, it basically means that, well, if you don't get any efficiency, it is very difficult to justify your merger, right? Because the only thing that you get is actually the market power, and that benefits no one except you. And by no one, I mean like competitors, all right? And well, there are some factors that may affect unilateral market power. The first one is clearly, right, concentration. The less player you have in the market, once you merge, it is more likely that you would have this unilateral market power. Market shares and capacity. If you were say that initially, for example, you have market share of like 30%, 30%, and 40%. Well, in that case, you might be competing quite fiercely, right? Because your market shares are quite close. But suppose that these 30% market share players merge into the same firm. Now this one becomes a 60% market share player, right? And in that case, when you merge, now you become quite a powerful player in the market, right? But on the contrary, it could be the case that you are just small players, and you can say that well, initially I have just 5% market shares, and I mean post merger, what I get is just 10% market share, and that would not change anything because there are there are so many more players out there who would dump the price down whenever I increase the price, and I won't be able to sell my product, so I will not be able to provide my services, right? Or market entry. Right, market entry plays an important role as well, because as we have learned, there might be just a few players. For example, there might be just 3 players now, right? And that is simply because in that industry, the economics of scale is required, or maybe the market is quite saturated, in the sense that the competition is quite intense already, and there's no reason for some potential entrants to come into the market and compete against these 3 firms. But suppose that maybe these 3 firms merge into the same. What happened is, if you can prove that, you know what, once I merge, in years, or not years, but in months, in a few months, people would just enter the market and compete against me. So it doesn't matter if I merge into the same firm, because well, new players would come in, right? That's something you need to prove in practice as well. And the way that you prove this empirically is you look back into the past, right? As we discussed earlier, you can look into the past and find some sort of historical evidence saying that, look, in the past 5 years, there are like this and this entrance. And the reason is because whenever someone exits the market, or whenever there was a merger deal, well, people would just come in, all right? Or you can look into other countries as well and say that, look at this the nature of this industry. It is really easy for people to enter the market. So there's no concerns whatsoever when it comes to competition post-merger, right? Demand variables. This is more about the, if you remember the case, right, that even if you merge, you can still do nothing because the buyer is like, say, for example, sole buyer, right? This has more to do with, I think you can bundle these two factors together, right? Demand variables and buyer power. Because if the demand is really inelastic, if demand is super elastic, right? Demand is super elastic. In that sense, what would happen? If demand is highly elastic, and when you merge, what would be your argument?
So you can say that even if you merge and have more market power, but the buyer will still, I mean, change to buy from someone else if you increase the price.
Right. Okay. Yes. So they basically it's elastic, right? People will just switch, and well, that could be because of some other reasons as well, apart from buyer power, right? It could be because of the nature of the product is essentially unnecessary, right? Or it could be because this is essentially quite seasonal. But the buyer power is the other way around, right? In the sense that, in this case, it's inelastic. It's elastic as well, not inelastic. It's elastic as well, but because well, you just cannot increase the price otherwise. But if I say no to you, then you don't have anyone to sell the product to, right? So that is the buying power, which basically means that even if you, for example, if you consider factor 1, factor 2, factor 3, and you say that, oh, there are just a few players, I'm quite a big player, I know my market is not that easy to enter, but you know what, I cannot increase the price arbitrarily, I cannot reduce the quality, because you look at another player, another competitor of mine, and that probably you have to consider this capacity as well, right? Because for example, if you argue that, look, if you consider my competitor, and my competitor has quite a substantial capacity, in the sense that if I sort of decrease my quality of product, or if I increase my price, then the buyer would just turn to my competitor, and my competitor can actually serve the whole market. They can increase their level of production, right? And that would be something that you can use to argue against your unilateral market power as well. And this one is quite an interesting thing, right? A classic case that you use is called what we call a failing firm defense, and this is actually used a lot in reality, right? For example, if you are Tesco, right? If you look at case of Tesco and CP, and if you can, you know that especially in the convenience store, right? Convenience store. And even pre-merger, I think CP has more than 90% market share in the convenience store due to 7-Eleven. But if CP can argue that I know that my market share is substantial and I would have a substantial market power even post-merger. But the reason they should allow me to buy Tesco is, for example, because Tesco is about to run out of business. There could be because of so many reasons. And if I say that, you know what, because they are failing, and if I do not buy them, or if we want merge, then I would have to get out or exit the market anyway. So the very reason that I buy them, well, this actually, and if you think about it, is it goes back to the logic of efficiency and market power as well, right? Because you know that even now, but I would say the next 2 quarters or in the next year, in 1 year or 2 years, they would have to exit the market anyway. But if I do it now, I can prolong the, I can elongate the life of that business, right? And that would save some employment, that would preserve these certain level of employment and also contracts with the suppliers as well. So if you do not allow me, then when they exit the market, the supplier will lose the source of that income. These employees will lose their job, right? So that is the failing firm argument, and it has been used a lot. But I mean, surely we have a different benchmark here, because it is quite difficult that you would be able to prove that one firm is going out of business. But it has been used a lot. This has been used a lot, right? Okay. Okay. So let's consider this efficiency gain a bit further. Right? We know that what we need to prove is this: post-merger, we would get something in terms of efficiency, right? And one side effect of this is this: suppose that you have you have 2 factories, right? You have 2 factories that would merge with each other. What happens is that get these economies of scale, where the cost per unit decreases, and when the cost of unit decreases, essentially it means that you may be able to set the price even lower, even if you have a higher market power, right? So in that case, because you produce more, right? When you produce more, even if the cost would increase, I mean the total cost would increase, but because now the share of your fixed cost is smaller, and when the share of your fixed cost is smaller, it basically means that the cost per unit will reduce as well, and that is essentially the meaning of economies of scale, right? Is this clear to you when I talk about this economies of scale, fixed costs, and why average cost is lower when you produce more? Is this clear to you? Because this is really important.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Pim,
Yeah.
you can say it.
Oh yeah, I said I think it's clear.
Cool.
Because they're like according to my understanding, it's because like that would be the same amount of investment, regardless of how much you produce, right? Like let's say you're trying to like bake a cake, you would need an oven no matter what. Like even if you bake 5 cakes or 50 cakes, you would need to invest in that one oven. So like if you end up producing 50 cakes, then the cost of investment in that one oven would be more worthwhile, like the average cost, compared to buying an oven just to produce 5 cakes.
Yeah.
Like, it's that logic, right?
Yeah, I mean, essentially what it is. Yes. Yes, yes. Good. I think I've accomplished something. Yes, lovely. Right? So that economies of scale, or you can think about synergies as well. For example, well, synergy usually comes when it is the case that you. Well, synergy usually comes through human resources, right? When you merge with another firms and you say that they are an expert in this area and you are an expert in another area, and once you merge into the same firms, you can combine this expertise and become sort of better in general, right? So that is essentially the synergy. So, for example, to make it concrete, we'll say that you are, I don't know. Okay, so more recent case that come to my mind is suppose that you have this legal firm, right? So you're very good at so for example M&A cases. But I'm now another law firm who is an expert in restructure businesses, right? Restructuring. And now because these are two pretty much different areas, but they are complementary to a certain extent as well. And you have a set of lawyers in your firms, like separately, and now you merge and become the same firm. In this case, you can get a synergies, right? Because whenever you have this sort of merger and acquisition, you can also work together with the restructuring team in order to provide a more comprehensive product as well. And I mean, looking from the consumers, the customer side, that is something that's quite beneficial, right? Because they can come to you on one go and get sort of like more comprehensive and more thoroughly advice, right? So so that's sort of synergies, but it could come in terms of like technology as well, right? When you have these technology firms and one has an expertise in software development, another firm has the technology in hardware. When you merge, and basically you can combine the capacity of your software. For example, Apple. Well, actually, this is if you follow the news, I will say now we have this shortage in chip production, right? Like computer chip, and one of the reasons is because these technological firms, for example, Apple, Samsung, they start to develop their own. And one of the reasons is because in the past 2 years, they have bought lots and lots of chip makers, right? They bought lots of chip makers, and now they have developed their own products. And because they do have these sort of other parts in place already, right? They have this marketing capacity as well. They have all these distribution channels, so they can scale much easier, right? Much more easily. And what happened is that they develop their own chips, which are actually even much better than the chip producers. And that is one of the reasons why now this sort of like Taiwanese chip makers companies find it quite difficult to compete, right? But also but that has nothing much to do with shortage, because the shortage has more to do with an increase, sort of disproportionate increase in demand due to the COVID situation, right? Because people bought lots and lots of electronic gadgets when they got locked down, right? We bought more computer, we bought more tablets, we bought more, and that caused this sort of temporary shortage in chips, computer chips, right? Okay. It could be that when you merge and you get these sort of rationalization, distribution, and marketing activities, and this is essentially what I just explained, right? When you merge and you become the same firm, one advantage that you may get is, for example, that initially you might be just a chip maker company, right? But now suppose that Apple bought you. Apple has its own distribution channels, global distribution channels, very efficient one as well. In this case, you can get a benefit as well, right? And suppose that you think about these two companies in two regions. For example, one company has a strong distribution network in Europe, and another has a strong distribution channel in Asia. What happened is that when they merge, now they can rationalize in the sense that in the old days, when you want to export to Europe, you may need to go to one sort of centroid first, right? You go to one country and you then distribute from there. But suppose that now you merged between two networks of distribution, you could possibly directly export to one particular country within another network without going all the way to the centroid and then redistribute it to the spokes again, right? If you think about it, that is what it means by rationalize. So rationalize basically means that you make it more efficient, you make it easier, make it cheaper, and that could be in terms of distribution, or it could be in terms of marketing activities as well, right? Because if you think about, like, for example, tourist industry, OTA, right, online travel agencies, you think about some of these platforms are active in certain regions, right? Like Rakuten is exclusively active in where?
Japan.
Japan, right? And but if I remember correctly, now Rakuten is under the same umbrella as Agoda and Booking already. So right? I think so. Yes, I think it's yes. But I could be wrong. But if I remember correctly, I know for sure that Agoda and Booking are under the same company, and that essentially covers the whole planet already, right? Because Booking is quite active in America and also Europe, and in the Asia Pacific here, Agoda is probably one of the biggest, right? Okay, so that's the rationalization. So basically, when you get larger, it's easier for you to allocate resources, right? So that's basically what it means by rationalization. So you have more capacity to switch resources, or not exercise, but sort of use your resources, right? Well, I spend a lot of time on this because this is really important. When you make an argument, you need to understand that what are the possibilities, right? And another thing is what we call X inefficiency. This is an important concept as well, because when your company, well, the thing is this, it is possible that one company would have this inefficiency, and X inefficiency comes from this management, right? Sometimes you have like a very sort of poorly structured company, or you you have like a bad management team. I think you might have seen so many merger cases in which one company has like not that professional management team, right? And another company is sort of like very famous for being a leader, is like a charismatic leader, or they have a very capable management team. And when you merge, when the better management team will take over another as well. And if you can promise that you will restructure the company, or you will change the management system of another company to slash this, what we call X inefficiency, which basically means the inefficiency that is created by the management, right? Or the company structure. For example, you have so many employees, and well, so many of sort of like repetitive job descriptions or redundant jobs or overlapping areas of practices, and that is what we call inefficiency as well. Something ongoing within the company from this sort of management or from the organizational structure. All right. But a caveat here is that you cannot just say that this will be better, that will be better, because you have to prove as well that the efficiency gains that you're claiming cannot be achieved otherwise, right? You have to become the same firm. Otherwise, this efficiency gain will not be materialized. This is important as well, okay? All right, and this is nothing. This is essentially just some caveat that I mentioned earlier, right? One thing is, when you pursue these cases, especially these merger cases, you spend most of your time trying to convey the message that this merger will increase efficiency gains, right? But at the same time, if your merger could potentially affect some other firms as well. For example, when your firms are getting larger and more attractive, one of the consequences is that other firms will become less attractive, especially if you consider about firms that are active in capital markets, in the stock market, right? Investors tend to go to the firms that they find, I mean, if you are investing in the stock market, you will see that if there's any merger case and you find that this firm will be quite powerful. For example, if you remember, there was the news, right, that there was an attempt of a hostile merger by the BDMS group, right? BDMS would like to purchase shares of BH, which is the Bamrung Rat Hospital, and in that case, if it were to be successful, what happened is now BDMS will be a very, very powerful player. And what happened is that people would just pool their money from other shares, right, other hospitals, to buy more stocks from BDMS. And that means that other firms' valuation will decrease, and that's probably decrease the efficiency gain as well. Because I mean, as when you pursue your case, right, you have to make an argument before the commission, and the commission doesn't care solely about your business, but the commission cares. So the point is this, right? The efficiency gains is not essentially the efficiency gain of your company, but it has to be the net efficiency gain of the whole market, right? Because you remember the concept of the Pareto Optimality, right? Do you remember Pareto Optimality?
If you can explain it like shortly.
Yeah, can you please like briefly go through it again?
Okay, yeah. The concept of Pareto efficiency or Pareto optimality is simply the case in which someone is better off without anyone is worse off. Okay, I can see it from your face. For example, you have a few players, right? Like 5 players. I mean, this is the benefit of having your camera on, right? So at least I know what I should explain further. For example, that you have 5 players in the market, and there is a merger between these 2 firms, right? You have proved everything. You proved that we're gonna get some synergies from this merger, and also you get economies of scale, whatsoever, right? And that would make you better off. If you believe in Pareto, the concept should be that okay, it is good that you're better off, but if you can prove that these two are not worse off, then that is great, because it say that essentially the whole market has improved by your transaction. And this would be, I think this is great, right? This is great. But sometimes it's quite difficult to prove, I mean, accordingly, right? Because I mean, when you get stronger, it definitely means that your competitors should be worse off to a certain extent. So when you prove the rule of reason, it is more likely that you will need to prove what is called a Caldor-Hicks efficiency. These are two persons' names, right? Could you remember what is the difference between Pareto and Caldor-Hicks? Oh, I haven't covered it, have I? Does it ring a bell at all, or it just doesn't ring
I
a bell?
don't think so, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay, but now you understand what it means by Pareto efficiency, right? You make someone better off without anyone worse off. Right, that's a very important concept, right? You help someone, but you should not help someone at an expense of another. Right? So that is the sort of ideal, right? That you want to pursue some policy and you want to make it Pareto efficient. What it means by that, when you talk to an economist will say, oh, well, we want to make this Pareto. And what it means by that is, we want to make someone better off without an expense. I mean, in an absence of someone's worse off, right? But Caldor-Hicks is maybe slightly different and more practical. Suppose this is the same situation, right? That you have a measure here. And definitely you can prove that, okay, I'll get this sort of synergy, I'll get this efficiency, and I'll have this sort of efficiency gain. But this one may be worse off in terms of efficiency, because whatever, investors would pull money out of them and divert money back to us, for example. But you can prove that this one is larger than this one, right? So the idea of Caldor-Hicks is this. It says that when you introduce some sort of change into the system in which someone is better off and someone is worse off, it is still okay, as long as, suppose there is a mechanism that can redistribute these benefits. You can arrive at Pareto efficiency. You get what I mean? Right? So suppose that this one is larger than another one, right? You prove that you have improved a lot and someone could be worse off. But suppose there is a mechanism, for example, tax. You can probably compensate for this. Suppose that this one, let me use it. Let's use pink too. So suppose this one has this magnitude, right? You say that you can actually redistribute this portion of mine and compensate this one, and I'm still better off. So in that case, if you can somehow redistribute, but it is not necessary that you would redistribute in reality, right? But theoretically, it says that if you can take a portion of my gain, efficiency gain, and you compensate that on someone lost, then I'll still have some positive here. And that is essentially the situation of Pareto efficiency, right? So it's like one step before we arrive at Pareto efficiency, right? So someone gets more than another. Okay, so I mean, it is not that essential as a lawyer, but if you work with economists and, well, you can explain these concepts, then that is cool, isn't it? But at least I think it's just good philosophically, right? When you talk about these concepts, and as a lawyer, when you try to pursue some policy or you do something, this is a really important concept. Okay. Okay. So that is the unilateral effect.
And then I have a question.
Yes, please.
So like, let's say if there is a merging between different players in the same supply chain,
Yes.
does this mean that as long as there is efficiency for the whole market, like if we can prove that at the end of the day the whole market will benefit from this merger, then it's not necessarily going to be vertical restraint or
What do you mean?
um like let's say different members on the in the same supply chain, like a sugar producer and a sugar cane farmer, for example. Like if these two merge between each other and for some reason they're able to prove that this merging would not monopolize the sugar market or create like unfair benefits in any terms, does this mean that their merging is like allowed?
Well, you have to prove two things, right? You have to prove that there are some benefits from merger, right? For example, you could say that as a sugar cane farmer and sugar producer.
Yeah.
If you merge and you say that, well, this is easier because instead of using contract, that you have to resign contract every, well, 1 year, 2 year, or quarters, or instead of relying on this sort of like contractual basis where you cannot control the quality of production, or you cannot transfer knowledge across these different players. And when you say that, suppose that I, as a sugar producer, right, I can sort of have my own R&D and develop the the system of the farmers, right, of the farm. I could provide some knowledge, know-how, and develop the production process, and it is easier that I could arrange. Well, I have more certainty in terms of the capacity, and then that would improve my logistic, and it makes it easier and more efficient. For example, that sort of thing, right? And at the same time, by being, that is the bit of efficiency gain, right? As I said. But at the same time, you can still argue that, look, other, well, sugar producers could still purchase from other farmers as well, right? Because well, this would reduce competition a little bit because, well, for example, well, other farmers would be less competitive when they compare to the farmers that we just basically merged, right? Merged into our firm. And also other producers would find themselves less competitive in terms of like, but they still have choices anyway, right? Because they could reach other farmers as well still. And suppose that we can guarantee that, well, we are not just serving our own, but we also, suppose that you merge and become the same firm. You say that even if now we have our own farmers, our own farms, we still serve other producers as well, and the prices are not that different from other players, other farmers. Then that's, you prove another bit, which is competition, right? So when you say the competition remains essentially the same or even better, whatever, and at the same time you can prove that you will get some efficiency gains. And as you say, you can prove that once you have this efficiency, you have this R&D, then you can share knowledge across different farmers as well, including the farmers that are not involving in the process or outside farmers. Then that will make your position even stronger, right? So you can come up with any story, and as long as it shows that it will not reduce competition and at the same time increase efficiency gains. Am I answering your question?
Yeah. So like, let's say like we're talking about something less general than sugarcane. Like let's say we're talking about this one company with very advanced like technological innovation merging with like a very advanced engineering company as well, and like let's say they merge in a way that like the contractual relationships remain very exclusive, even like despite like the efficiency these two companies, like the new company would gain, then it's still very risky, right? That these companies merging would create an anti-competitive effect and merging would not be allowed.
Well, yeah, I think it essentially boils out to this, right? Because, for example, in this case, if you talk about vertical, right?
Yeah, it could be vertical or any. Does it like are they? Would the result be any different if it's vertical or horizontal?
Well, it seems to be milder, right, when it comes to vertical actions, right? Because you still have these competitors outside.
Right.
And I mean the same reason like why we say the vertical restraint seem to be okay. For example, it eliminates some sort of like problems. For example, this double marginalization, right? That sort of thing that we discussed earlier when we had this conversation on vertical restraints. So I mean it's just, well, of course, when you merge and you become bigger, you would reduce competition naturally, right? That's natural. You can avoid having less competition. But as long as you can prove that, well, this is like weighing between two things, right? So I think this is difficult, but in most cases, you well is yeah. In reality, it's just really difficult to weigh between these two things, right? A reduction in competition and an increase in efficiency gain. So I think your duty is to try to prove that you have tons and tons of these benefits, and at the same time prove that the reduction of competition is not that huge. But there is another mechanism that you can do that as well, is by sort of providing this sort of remedies package, right? If you recall, right, you can provide, normally when you pursue this sort of merger case, you might admit that, okay, some certain areas, I know that I will compromise competition quite substantially. And I know that given that thing, right, for example, this particular product or this particular area, well, I know that you will not give me a clearance and I will not be able to go ahead with my transactions. Then I might provide a sort of remedy saying that I want, maybe I will sell this unit to a third party, or maybe I promise that I would share the knowledge with other competitors, and that would reduce the magnitude of a reduction in competition, right? Because if you can promise accordingly, and that is something that we use as a sort of like a, I don't know, a something to compromise, right? To compromise with the commission. Is this clear? Okay. Yeah, but
Clear, thank you.
we're gonna be discussing much further when we have case studies, right? Which I think is next week, is it? Yeah, but it's really case by case basis. I mean, it depends on which industry you are in, but your duty is just to prove that the efficiency gain is huge and you compromise competition just a little. And commission would have to prove otherwise, right? Commission would have to say that, really, because I know that you have all the incentives in the world to say the competition is changes a little, but actually it might not be the case. And at the same time, I have to take your efficiency gain with a grain of salt, right? So you know what I mean. Okay, but this is not something that's you base solely on logics or arguments, right? In most cases, you base on evidence, and that is something that you need to crunch the number and find empirical evidence to prove your point. Okay, so the second effect is pro-collusive effect, which basically means that, as you said, where I have this model to show you, but well, normally when you have this sort of like you can go on with the standard sort of assumptions that the consequences of having a merger would be that well, first thing is quite clear, right? The merger will benefit the merging firms, and once you get larger, merger would increase the outsiders' profits. Makes sense, right? As we discussed earlier, because when you have greater market power, you will be able to increase the price even further, and your competitors have all the incentives in the world to increase the price as well, right? Merger would increase producer surplus. This is natural. But again, when you increase prices, what happened is that this would reduce the net welfare. Is this clear?
Yes.
Okay. And these are the results from the standard models in industrial organizations, which but this is actually interesting because if you look at the model itself, it has like I think 3 pages of derivation, right? All different equations, and then eventually we arrive at the conclusions that are so plain, right? These things you don't really need 3 pages of mathematical model to prove this. You can just use pure logic. Right, and that is actually one of the main flaws of modern economics. That I mean, when I studied master's degree, I had to derive one model, and it took me like 2 hours sitting in an exam, 2 hours, 6 pages, A4, just to arrive at the conclusion that when you increase the wages, people would want to get more jobs, right? You have 6 pages of equations, like purely mathematics, like pure mathematical equations, just to arrive at something very intuitive and very simple. So that is one of the main flaws of economics that people are criticizing. All right, and well, this is actually something that we covered already. All right, and I think essentially what it says is that efficiency gains must be high enough, right? Efficiency gains must be high enough in order to compensate for a reduction in competition. So just a pure point here. And when you say that, well, when you say that pro-collusive effect, you can think about the factors that we covered already, right? The pro-collusive effect. You remember the factors determining the possibility or the likelihood of collusion, right? You remember from the previous lecture. Could you come up with some of these factors determining collusion? What makes it easier for firms to collude?
Less player in the market.
Less player. Bishwit, you were opening.
No, it's a mistake.
Okay. Less players. What else? Well, this is clear, right? You have less players, it's easier for you to collude. With the nature of product, it is possible.
Yeah, I think that can be another factor.
Sometimes we call the homogeneity, right? The homogeneity. I mean, it's similar products are more likely to, well, the sort of like the greater similarity of the product, the easier you find when you try to agree upon something, right? Like prices, on especially prices, right? Because if your firm's product is exactly the same without any differentiation, and if you recall, right? If you may recall, when you consider this market definitions, even these products are not homogeneous in the sense that they are not quite the same in terms of characteristics. They could still be substitutable, right? Because they could still be in the same market. For example, like the plainest example is like banana and apple, right? They're not really homogeneous. They are so different, but they could be considered in the same market because consumer can switch between them. But suppose that you are an apple seller, and your friend is a banana seller, and you need to collude. Though it is a little bit more difficult than the case that both of you are apple sellers, right? Because these products are homogeneous, and when they are homogeneous, it is easier for you to agree upon certain characteristics like prices, quantities, or market share, right? But when the products are different, even if they are in the same market, it is more difficult for you to collude. Right? And also there is a sort of a characteristics of demand as well. For example, if the demand is really volatile, right, the price keeps changing, it's so difficult for you. It is so difficult for you to agree on a certain price level, right? Or if there are so many factors that you can consider. If you have sort of different, they call this, if you have different sort of multi-markets, what the term? But the concept is essentially that, for example, that you are competing in one market, it is easier for you to collude if you also have sort of relationships in other markets as well, right? Because one thing is, you use this sort of like other relationships as a threat, saying that if you do not agree, or if, well, it makes it easier because you know that if you compete here, it is not just that you sort of like declare war against this competitor in one market, but also in other markets as well, right? So there are so many factors that would contribute, and once the firms in these different markets merge, and you have to argue that, okay, there's no pro-collusive effect, or if you are a commission, you have to prove that there might be this pro-collusive effect. You would need to take these factors into account. All right. Okay, merger remedies. Now we learn all these effects, and merger remedies are two kinds, right? As I said, the first thing is what we call structural remedies. For example, I think this thing is quite. I think we covered these two kinds of remedies. Have we?
I think you touched upon it a little bit when we were discussing like the cases.
All right. Okay. But just to recap them again, the structural remedies means that, well, essentially, if you will become a monopoly in a certain market definitions, for example, in the case of the retail industry, right? You have sort of geographical areas, and you could end up having like 1,000 markets, right? Each market has one branch of your, well, retail store. In some certain stores, you might be, I mean, post-merger, you might become a sole store, right? You will become a monopoly. And in that case, what you might need to do is you might need to sell it, or you might say that, well, I will not, I wouldn't merge into the same firm, but I will sell these two. Suppose that initially you have two stores, right? And you merge to become one. In that particular market, what you can promise is you say, oh, you don't promise, but the commission forced you to do, right? And you can say that I'm gonna divest. What you do essentially is you might need to sell these two stores to business operators, right? The third-party business operators, and the consequence of that is these two business operators would become competitors, right? And that essentially preserve. Or what you can do is you say that you don't merge that one. I'm gonna keep one store, one initial, not initial, but one existing store of mine. Okay, for example, you have Big C, right? Suppose that Big C complete. I mean, Big C succeeded in the deal, and Big C could purchase Tesco. And in that particular area, for example, in Param C, in the Param C area, if you look at the map, you will see that there is one Tesco, right? There is one Tesco on, I think it's essentially just opposite to RE, right? Sorry, RE. Not really, but in that neighborhood. Okay, and you have another Big C, which is just across the road. In that case, suppose that Big C is successful in purchasing Tesco, and it is proof that there are just these two hypermarkets in the area, and no other consumers would come into that area to purchase. Or no, I mean, no consumers of these two stores would find it easy to travel out of this area. So you become a monopoly in that particular market definition, right? Suppose that you are Big C. What you can promise is like, okay, I'm gonna keep my Big C store, and for that particular area, I'm gonna sell this branch of Tesco to a third party. For example, I'm gonna sell this to CP. I will let CP run this branch of Tesco, and therefore I preserve competition in this area, right? And in some other areas, there might be some other stores anyway. Right? For example, you have Macro, right? Or maybe you have some other hypermarkets in the area. You say that, okay, in this particular the market definition, I think I should get a clearance, right? So this sort of what we call a structural remedy, that you promise that you sell your asset. And in this case, basically, you sell the store, right? So that is what we call a structural remedy. Or maybe if you are a producer of some sort of products, you might say that, okay, post-merger, I'm going to sell certain divisions of my product to the third party. Because post-merger, I could be a monopoly in that particular line of product, right? I'm going to sell that line of product or a part of it, or that line of product in a particular geographical area. I'm going to sell that to a third party, right? So that is structural remedy. it is more permanent, right? You can imagine that when you sell the asset, then you sell the asset and it's gone. But it's difficult because what you need to guarantee is, I'll come back to another one. And it could be intangible assets as well, right? And it has to be serious in the sense that you really need to sell it to someone who can operate the business. Right, for example, in our example, when you talk about, let's say, so the Brahma 4 area, and you have this Tesco and you have this Big C. Suppose that you merge and you need to sell this to a third party. This third party has to be a serious contender, right? You cannot just sell it to like your friend who has no experience whatsoever in the retail industry. Right, because that guarantee failure. But you have to find a satisfactory buyer. This third party could be some, and in so many cases they find some sort of like purchasers from abroad, right? They find that as a business partners who has experience in the industry, and but do you think it's still very difficult because you consider this big department stores, for example, big Japanese department store, right? That they came to Thailand and they operate, and turns out they were a great success when they operate back home, but when they came in and they opened their own store in Thailand, and they failed miserably, right? So this is not something that is that easy to transition across different cultures, especially when it comes to certain industries, especially services. But I think you could come up with the name of Japanese department stores that open in Thailand and then have to close their store. But there are not just, there are quite a few actually, and so that is the difficulty of it, right? Because when you pick these buyers, you have to pick them carefully, and you have to provide certain guarantee that will preserve competition really, right? Otherwise you just like prolong the time, and then these chains would need to get out of the business anyway, right? And so that's essentially the conclusion of the problems that I said, right? The most difficult part of this is to find a proper, right, a proper buyer, and that is difficult because the whole reason is you need to get someone who would preserve competition, who would be able to compete against you. And one thing is this is difficult to find. The second thing is you don't have any incentive to do that, right? As a Hisco, right? Sorry, as a big, for example, in this case, it should be this store, right? Because suppose you are big C, it has to be the store that you sell, right? It has to be the store. You find a third party to buy it. Well, in Thailand, that could make sense that you sell it to CP. But still, I mean, operating one store is so different from the operating 100 stores, right? And that is why divestiture in some industries, it's really difficult because you have to find this buyer who would preserve competition, and commission knows that you don't have any incentive at all to find a good buyer, because what's the point of picking a good competitor to compete against you? That is not the nature of business, right? And asymmetric information essentially means that you know better than commission, right? The commission knows that, okay, this is probably a good buyer, but how could I know that this player would be able to come in and, well, get it started and run the business and compete against you? You know better, surely, right? So the incentives are not well aligned, and that is quite a problem. But the good thing is this sort of guarantee competition, right? Because if you look at the alternative of it is what we call the behavioral remedies. And this is what applies in the case of CP, right? If you look at the case, This is the behavioral remedy saying that, well, you have to purchase certain product from the SMEs. You promise that you want to exchange your information across companies post-merger. This is quite clear, right? You don't, well, it says that you set constraints, right? So the baseline is that when you merge and you become the same firm, you should be freely allocate resource, right? You should be able to use the resources in whichever way you like. But these behavioral remedies would be imposed and sort of put some restraints on the way that you could use these assets or property rights. Right? For example, I commit that I will license my technology to the competitors. Right? For example, you will be an exclusive owner of this technology, and you say that I'm gonna license this technology to my competitors as well. Or yeah, you can do this case. Does it ring a bell? AstraZeneca. Right? There used to be two different firms, and they merged and become the same firm. Right? And they need, and this is actually a good proof, right? Because they can say that, you know what, if we didn't merge, probably you wouldn't have these COVID vaccines from the very beginning, because we have improved quite a lot, and that is an argument on efficiency gain, right? We have this sort of R&D resources pooled, and that has improved our capacity in terms of research and development. And I'm sure that they put that in their arguments as well. But this, they have more of these sort of distribution rights, right? They have to grant it to the third party as well. And but that is the case in the Sweden and Norway. All right, the cases we brought to the court in that context, right? So in that case, using shorter term contracts means this. For example, in the old days, you might have this. So, for example, if you are vertical, if you have this vertical merger, right? And I'm sorry. Let's say that you, well, it could be both. It could be both ways, right? But suppose that you have this sort of long-term contract with some distributors, and when you merge with each other, basically means that you fend off some other distributors from the contractual relationship with you, right? So they could ask you that instead of having like 6 years, 6-year term contract, you can have like 3 years or even shorter, in order to allow the distributor to come into this contractual relationship with you as well, right? Or it could be the other way around as well. As for example, that now you have, well, for example, that say that you have this sort of 7-Eleven, right? And you have Tesco a lot or something, right? And you have your distributor, your suppliers, right? And suppose the suppliers like CPF, and you have some other suppliers as well, right? You imagine this, and once you merge, what do you think is your natural move as an owner of CP? Once you merge with Tesco, and Tesco has some other suppliers apart from CPF, what would you do as a business?
Maybe we'll switch suppliers from other suppliers to like CPF.
Yeah, you could do that, right? Because now this is actually your own business, right? And this is cheaper, and well, you want to keep money within your own company, right? You don't want to sell it. You want to give money to someone else. And in this case, what do you think can be the behavioral remedies?
So you may have a requirement to also have a contract with other suppliers as well.
Exactly, right? You can be imposed this remedy saying that you have to keep this contract for at least the next 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years, right? So that is possible as well and could be imposed. But the problem is this. So there are so many possibilities, right? There's so many possibilities. And it should be the case that you want to preserve this in order to, one thing is to, well, enhance efficiency gain, right? Efficiency gain. But this is not usually the case, but the second objective should be to reduce an impact on competition, right? You impose behavioral remedy and there's no sort of like strict set of rules or strict set of remedies that you can impose. It depends on the case-by-case basis. But you have to have in mind the objective with that is to preserve competition, which is essentially the same objective as the structural remedies, right? And the problem is, as you can see, monitor, right? The monitoring cost is really, really high, right? How would you know? I mean, this one is clear, right? This one is something that you can observe. But if you look at the case of CP, right? And one of the behavioral remedies say that, Tesco and CP cannot exchange marketing information for the next 3 years. Do you think that is something that you can monitor? Can you monitor their internal activities as a commission?
It's going to be really difficult.
Right? I can basically have some information in my flash drive and I've just sent it over by in Messenger, right? Or that is probably too complicated, but I can just send over to you, and who's gonna know? Right? Nobody knows. And that is why the behavioral remedy is quite difficult, because you, as a commission, you have tons and tons of cases every year, right? And you need to set aside some resources, and that has to be quite substantial amount of resources as well, in order to monitor this enforcement, these remedies imposed, right? So that is why it is really difficult nowadays to usually they try not to impose behavioral remedies. The standard practice is to impose these structural remedies, because this is quite clear, and there's no monitoring cost, right? Because when the asset is gone, it's gone. You just have to be more careful at the very beginning when the proposal came, right? That okay, are these buyers, or it is a nominee, right? And that is something that you can trace. But when it comes to this sort of behavioral remedies, it's really difficult, because probably the only way that you can detect is by asking these firms to provide a report, right? And again, they don't have any incentive whatsoever to produce the correct report, the truthful report, especially in a situation where you don't even have any detector, right? You can't detect. How would you know that they are lying, right? So that's a difficulty. Okay, so I think essentially you understand the whole idea of merger already, and let's take a step back and have a look at the Thailand Competition Act, right? What it says about this. Well, the merger is written in section 51 to section 53, and there are two cases, right? There are two cases. The first one is you can think of it as the milder case, right? And it requires notification. But this, I shouldn't use the term notification, but I should use the term approval, right? If it is milder in the sense that, well, so there are three level, right? There are three level. Sorry, that's it. You can have the case of benign, right? In the sense you reduce competition, but just so trivially, and that has no impact on the economy or the market whatsoever. And in that case, because you think about competition commission, right? Then there could be like, well, I think 10,000 mergers a year, and you don't have resources to deal with all of them or to consider all of them. Right, what you need to consider is you need to focus on the ones that may have substantial impact on the economy, on the market, or on the economy as a whole. So you need to draw some line, right? That if it's just a small cases or like benign merger, I don't care. You can do whatever you do. But when it is a bit more, well, it's just big. So the milder case is the case where you have this as a significant competition reduction. In that case, you can go ahead with your merger, right? You go ahead with your merger and you just come and notify the commissions within 7 days post merger, right? It's sort of like something that is not complicated. But in the case of more severe, which is the case when post merger and you become a monopoly, or post merger then you become a market dominant player. You still remember the definition of market dominant player, right?
I think it's according to the OTCC
Yes.
notification, right?
Yeah, abuse of dominance thing, right? We learned earlier. Okay, same definition, right? It's sort of like post merger and then you become a market dominant player, and definitely monopoly means that you become a sole player in the market, right? And your market share is essentially 100%. In that case, you can't go ahead with the merger. What you need to do is you need to ask for an approval in advance. And once you get a clearance, then you can go ahead with the merger, right? And the proper definition of merger is, well, you A plus B, you become A, or A plus B, you become a new business operator, right? So this is something that quite intuitive. And it could be the case of acquisition as well, that you purchase certain stocks from another firm. I have a PDF note if you want to have a look into detail what it means by merger. Okay, I think I put it in the no. I think it's in the, how could I minimize this? But you know what I mean, right? We come back to this later, but well, there will be some conditions in which, like, how would you consider what sort of asset that you purchase from another firm, but essentially you have to purchase an asset to a certain level that you have this sort of controlling power over another firm. All right. You can look into detail later in the note, and if you have any questions, please put it in the live room. Okay. So let's have a look at the pre-merger approval. that you need to ask, which is in the article 21, paragraph 2. It says that once you become a monopoly, right, which means that you're a player that is free to set prices and or quantity, and not in every case, as I said, if you are just small player, who cares? All right, but you should have at least 1 billion baht in turnover, right, in the previous year. And for the market dominance, this is the same definition as we discussed earlier, right? That if you are one player, you should have market share over what?
I think it's 50%.
Yes, 50%. And if you are in the top 3 altogether combined, has to have above 75%, right? And it doesn't apply to anyone who has a smaller than 10% market share or sell less than 1 billion baht in the previous year, right? So that's the definition of market dominant player, right? Clear. Okay. And what you need to put, this is from the notifications. One thing is the merger plan, right? This is for the pre-merger first. And the more complicated case is clearly the pre-merger, right? Because this is something that you need to ask for approval. And now, when you are dealing, when you are about to conclude the deal or close the deal, this has become one of the main sort of preconditions that, okay, our merger is subject to the clearance from the Competition Commission, right? So now this is what usually you would do, this sort of M&A compliance, right? And there may be some financial clearance. So 2 parties that would usually involve in this M&A cases are law firm and the FA, right? But now you would have another party, which is an economist, competition consultant, who work on this merger cases as well. So now it becomes another crucial party who is working this area, right? And nothing. This is actually, they have a form, right? They have a form that I would ask for this information, like who are the merging partners, how their shareholder structures are, voting rights, turnover, market shares, right? And then you have to analyze what sort of the market structure it is. How do you draw a market definition, right? What market shares these different players or different merging partners, and including other players in the market as well, right? What market shares look like? What about turnover? And how's the competition is? Would these players, especially the merging partners, gain any post-merger efficiency? Right, you can see that all these things are essentially what we covered earlier, right? And these will be asked by the Competition Commission or the OTCC, right? And then you have to make your case for the analysis, which is in accordance with the second paragraph of section or article 52, right? That you have to prove your business necessity, which essentially the same as the efficiency gains, right? Effects on economy. Would you improve any other parties in the market? What about effects on consumer welfare? Right? This is something that you have to talk about your price, your market power. You can claim about your synergy, because your synergy would improve the quality of the products, and that is something the consumers would enjoy. Right? So this is why I talked a lot about these concepts earlier, because it's pretty much the bread and butter of this thing, right? And when you zoom into this effect on competition, But there are so many things you need to improve, right? Concentration, what's going on, and is there any possibility of entering the market, or would it be possible that some other players, apart from the merging parties, would be able to expand their businesses? Right, it is expansion, because if they can expand their businesses, it basically means that the competition would, even if now it is compromised, but in the near future it would resume. Right, that is something the unilateral effect, something we covered. Pro-collusive effect. Oh, there's another name for this, right? You can call unilateral effect as a non-coordinated effect, and the coordinated effect means the pro-collusive effect, right? And you discuss these economic and consumer effects and other effects that you can come up with. And eventually, what you're trying to prove is you try to prove that an increase in market power is outweighed by an increase in efficiency. If you want it to get clear, right? Section 50 should say that you could be granted a permission if, well, essentially, if they consider these factors, to say that, okay, there's a valid business related necessity, right? And it benefits the business operators, which essentially this is extracted from the law, right? From the wordings in the law. But essentially, it's just saying that you have to prove this, right? No impact on the essential benefits of the consumer, not causing severe damage to the economy, right? But the way you prove it essentially by, and should you find that you want to appeal, you can appeal to the administrative court in 60 days, right? Post-merger is quite straightforward. And if you find that, well, post-merger you want to be qualified as a dominant player, right? In that case, if the market is, if you are big enough but you are not big enough in terms of market share, but sorry, but you had sales last year above 1 billion baht, then your merger would be considered as a significant competition reduction, and you might need to well, basically notify the commission 7 days afterwards, right? Well, I think it's quite similar here in Thailand. The idea is not that rigid in the sense of, no, not that rigid, but it's quite the other way around, because in the European Union, they do have this concept of market share as well, but these market shares are not the sole criteria, right? If we consider, in our case, we use market share like essentially as the sole criteria. But in European Union, they have so many factors that they take into account when it comes to this consideration of market power, or being a dominant player, or even significant less competition, or sometimes they call it SRC concept. Right, there are so many factors to take into account, like the nature of industries, the nature of demand, ability or market entry or exit. Yeah, they have so many factors to take into account, not just the market share. Because if you consider the case of Thailand, once your market share is below a certain level, you're free to go, right? So and they have this dominance taste, which is you can think about it as a taste to show this pro-collusive effect, right? And well, they do put a lot of emphasis on this efficiency gains, right? And that is why when you pursue these cases, you need to show that you have got efficiency gains, right? And you have to weigh these efficiency gains against the anti-competition effect as well. Right. I think the case is it's not that complicated, and we're gonna cover the cases. I'll tell you about the case quickly, right? It's a Nestle and Perrier, which you know that they sell drinking water, right? Mineral water. It was quite an old case in 1991, but I think there are much better cases out there, and I look forward to hear these cases from you next time, right? Oh, again, just to remind, you reshuffle your pair again. All right. So now it's another combination of pairs. All right. In this case, Nestle agreed with BSN to sell the Volvic. Right, the Volvic, you remember? I think it's selling in Thailand as well. Volvic mineral water, source of Perrier, because usually these mineral water brands are named after the source, right? And this is the Volvic source of Perrier. So now, and Perrier is, in this case, you sell, the Nestle took over, right? Nestle took over Perrier. And the merger of Nestle and Burrito was investigated. And the final result was that they get this conditional clearance, right? Some Perrier sources were transferred to the third party, which is considered as a structural remedy. As you can see here, the European Commission decide that yeah, that you should sell some of your sources to the third party. And the way that they analyze the case is to start, well, classically by define the market, and then they consider if you have a single dominance position, and then look at if you have the choice dominance, which is in this case is a unilateral, right? Unilateral, and this case is a pro-collusive. And the market definition is, well, mineral water is indeed the case, right? But they also consider if soft drink and purified tap water are substitutable. Essentially, are they in the same market or not? And you can guess that these are the arguments from the merging party side, right? Because you want to expand the market definition to be as broad as possible. But it turns out that the European Commission disagreed, right, and say that these products, soft drink and purified tap water, should not be included in the same market as the mineral water. And the geographic market, in this case, they just focus on French market, not cross-border, right? Because they say that the transportation is, well, quite expensive, especially cross-border. And in practice, there are not that sort of much traffic in terms of the trade of the mineral water cross-border. Okay, and in entering into the French market of this border is quite difficult. But nowadays, probably the situation has changed because of the maturity of the European Union itself, right? And also because of the advance of the technology and the logistics system. Maybe the market definition could be broader now, right? So it depends as well. It doesn't mean that when the market has been drawn like 20 or 30 years ago, it has to remain the same nowadays, because the infrastructure and technology advancement has changed a lot, right? So maybe now it's not the French market, but it could be the whole Europe, right? These are the market shares. All right. What is interesting is the European Commission considers just a single firm dominance, right? They do not consider this as a unilateral effect, but they just look at one firm. If that firm has I mean, essentially, when post-merger and you become a single firm dominance or not. All right. So they say that not really, because when Nestle and Perrier, when they merge, they have just like 40, 45, and 55%. But as Volvic, In this case, if you sell to BSN, BSN would have just 30%. So it says that, well, for the Volvic, you shouldn't have this sort of single firm dominance position. Right, but what is interesting is they did not consider this unilateral effect, because when you consider this unilateral effect, what you should consider is whether this merger would raise the prices or not, right? Because if you look at this, you look at